We have breaking news from the New York Times that apparently there's a confab going on in Washington somewhere with President Biden deciding whether he should continue to stay in the race or not. And this is right on the heels. Apparently, this has been reported by the New York Times. This is on the heels of the New York Times editorial board, which a few days ago just flatly said he should leave the race. So, of course, they're going to be the first ones to break this news here. And the White House immediate reaction is, no, it's not true. We could have debunked this, which almost means it for sure is true if they're denying it so vehemently. I don't know why he wouldn't be having this meeting anyway. But we're going to talk today about what the implications of this are, and especially if Trump does, in fact, win the election, really whether Biden stays in or not. This just seems to make it more probable that Trump is going to win. But we want to see what impact that's going to have on the Russia-Ukraine war. And we have one of our new favorite guests of all, maybe the favorite right now, Larry Johnson, coming back on, former CIA analyst and just a really great guy. And obviously a sharp dresser. So we really appreciate having you on today, Larry.
Thank you, Danny. I'm in Florida business casual.
Yeah, that's good. And kind of a prep for 4th of July almost in its buoyancy. So it's good. Well, so look, let's just talk about what's right off the top of the bat here, since it's kind of breaking news here. I mean, what do you make of these reports that Biden is weighing whether he should continue the race or not?
Okay, so let's first talk about how to read the media. Now, I think you were fortunate in your career. You didn't have to spend much, if any, time in Washington, D.C. I did. And I learned very early on in my first days at CIA, they come in, they brief us upon all this top secret information. And then like the next day, I'm seeing on the front page of the Washington Post and the New York Times, that information we were told that was top secret, it's being talked about and published. So what we need to understand is whether this report from the New York Times comes from legitimate sources inside the Biden inner circle that are saying, yeah, here's what's going on, or is this part of, let's call it a Democrat information operation where they're trying to shape the battlefield to create, they're going to keep putting the message, yeah, boy, Biden, he's talking about resigning. And Biden's like, when he's awake, goes, am I talking about resigning? No, sir. No, you're not. Or at least that's what Jill's telling him. So once we figure out what's going on, I think at a minimum, this is an organized effort by the Democrat establishment to get rid of Joe Biden. They realize he's now toxic. They've got to do something with him. What they didn't in their planning, because some have talked about that for 2 years, they sat down with Michelle Obama, convinced her to throw her hat in the ring. Now, I've always doubted that story. I've got 2 friends who swear on the sources they heard it from. I have no doubt that is true, but I don't think Michelle just actually has the stomach for it to get out there and do this and not be able to spend all the leisurely time at her beachfront homes in New York and Hawaii. But Kamala Harris, if they were counting on getting rid of Kamala, that was their first bad assumption. Kamala's got a death grip in there. Man, she fully expects to go in as president. And she's got enough supporters around her that are saying, yeah, let's let the black woman take over. Now, the fact of the matter is that she's Caucasian, of Indian descent, continent India, not American Aborigines. Still, it goes along with the Democrat desire to pretend that men can be women, women can be men, and that Kamala Harris can be a black woman. So, it's all in the pretend area. But the notion that if you look at the media now, they're saying, oh, yeah, man, Kamala, she's within striking distance of Donald Trump. Oh, man, Kamala, she's our person. And you know what? We'll team her up with Pete Buttigieg. If you thought that Biden and Harris was as stupid as it could get, sorry to disappoint, it can only get worse.
Man, and when you we'll stick on the Michelle Obama aspect for a second. She's obviously very popular, especially among the Democrats, but just generally so. But that's because of what she's been, the first lady, and by many accounts, she did a good job as a first lady and represented the United States well. But the minute that you put on a campaign candidate hat, then you're going to come under all kinds of scrutiny and all kinds of pressure. And she doesn't have the chops for it. I mean, she just doesn't have the knowledge to be commander in chief of the United States of America and then run our foreign policy like she does. So I don't think that there's serious thought to that, because I think she recognizes that. I do.
Well, I think she's a mythological creature because, number one, there's a lot of myths surrounding this. Number one, she was not that popular. If she was that popular, her Netflix show, she and Barack, boy, they produced a Netflix show. They got paid, multiple millions of dollars. And you know what? If you're potato salad sitting out in the sun on a 4th of July picnic and you can't attract flies, that means that's some pretty bad potato salad. Okay.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah. And here's Michelle, man. She couldn't attract viewers. Where are all those women supporters? Man, oh, we can't wait to get us enough of Michelle. Compare that with Trump. Trump, with all of his controversy, with all of the nonsense that surrounds him, by God, he put butts in the seats. He got eyes on the tube. People were watching him. And it had ratings. And this is all about ratings, because voting is just another expression of ratings. Michelle can't draw the ratings. And let's remember, Barack Obama was so popular, so beloved, that the Americans couldn't wait to vote for Donald Trump as a replacement. Okay? So let's get a grip on reality that the Black Jesus was not exactly our savior.
And okay, so let's look at the other possibility here. So if it was Kamala Harris, I mean, you're talking about that Michelle Obama is not really all that popular. And I think in some circles she was, but man, I don't think there's any circles that Kamala Harris is popular. And I think certainly in the first year of the administration, she scored the worst rating of a vice president in the modern era. So I don't see how that's going to work out. But like one of the headlines, Gary, just popped up there, is that apparently a lot of the Democrats are now trying to, talk about how they support her, which might indicate that there is some movement toward that.
Yeah, well, they've sat down and they looked at the money. Money's the issue. If Biden drops out and throws Harris to the wolves, and so she's not there, all this money that the Biden team has raised for their presidential effort can't be transferred to anybody else. So the Democrats are now realizing, man, we got all these, hundreds of millions of dollars that we've raised, and if we dump Harris, that has to go back to the donors, because it can't go into Joe Biden's pockets for his retirement program.
Oh, yeah. Right. Okay, I see. Right. Okay, but it can go to Harris if she becomes
because she's still part of the team, if you will. If they tried to put in anybody else like Gavin Newsom, Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, Gretchen Whitmer, Ronald McDonald, the clown, if they do any of those, they can't just transfer the money to them. And so I think the Democrats hadn't really thought that through. And once they realized that, they had that, oh my God moment. So we got to figure out a way to make this piece of garbage float.
Okay. And so now let me ask you to put your CIA analyst hat on for a second here. Let's back up a little bit and look at this maybe at the 30,000 foot level and over time. So I tend to agree with you, what you said the last time you were on our show, that this was a plan from the Democratic Party to have the debate as early as they did, and they were ready to be making all these pronouncements. The top Democratic people, immediately after the debate was over, they didn't hesitate at all. So that tells me that they were probably ready for that, which implies that this is something that maybe even is outside of Biden, him recognizing he can't go in. But then you have to say, okay, hang on a second, because this is not news. I tweeted something out in February of this year, which is, not that recently, but I said, look, Biden is showing he can't do this job and it's only going to get worse in time. And now it is. So obviously people on the inside knew the truth. But the question is, why have they waited this long to start doing something? Because it looks like they're kind of scrambling to me.
Yeah, well, there's I've seen this kind of, I call it a failure in planning. So right after when I first started my consulting business, I was hired by the CIA to go out and survey the intelligence community, because they were putting together a chemical, biological, NBC nuclear biological chemical database. And I interviewed DIA, FBI, CIA, NSA, all of the three-letter agencies. And so as I'm going along, I realize, yeah, they're developing this great architecture, but nobody figured out who's going to be responsible for putting the information in. It wasn't magically going to happen. But I just went along assuming, oh, they've thought of that. Well, when we get to the final meeting and I present my evaluation, I then ask the question, so, hey, by the way, which of you is responsible for feeding the information in to get this database populated? And they all looked around the room and were doing this. And I realized all these really, really smart people at the top of their intelligence agencies had neglected the very fundamental thing. And I guarantee you that's exactly what's happened to the Democrats in this situation. They thought they had this thing planned. Oh, yeah, we got this scripted out. But they forgot to ask the one question. Will Kamala Harris go willingly into that dark night? And the answer is no. She's hanging on. She's not going to let go.
Man, and then you have Biden, who it doesn't sound like he was wired into this plan either, because of how emphatic he was, to rebut all this. That no, I just had a bad day. That's it. It's all it was. And of course, Jill Biden, in the immediate aftermath, given that really odd cheerleading session that we saw on the video, where she was saying, "You did a great job," and all this kind of stuff, and you had the crowd cheering. But he seems to still be pushing back. And who knows, maybe that report from the White House was true, where they're saying, we don't know anything about a meeting that you talked about a minute ago, which implies that then there's a lot of dispute and discontinuity within the Democratic Party.
Well, I'm not even sure that Biden knows what's going on. We had that movie, 30 plus years ago with Peter Sellers, with Chauncey Gardner, Peter Sellers playing this guy who was, found himself becoming president. And the man was mentally retarded. And he had severe mental deficits. But what we saw in that movie was everybody treated some of his mental deficits when he would say something as if it was a profound insight. Oh my God, did you hear what he said? And now we've seen that fiction, that film become reality, because you've got Democrats walking around saying, boy, is that Biden? He's as sharp as a tack. Can you believe how on top of his game he is? Now, they got away with that for a while, but the American people that tuned in, a week ago, last Thursday, they know what they saw.
Yeah.
And they know that, hey, wait a second. This was not special effects. This was not CGI. This is like my mother or my uncle, my elderly relative who's lost their marbles. And, God bless them. There was a time in their life when they were sharp, but not now. And what you got to do is do the equivalent. You remember that Darwin chart, which shows, going from the ape to an upright human being walking. Well, you got the reverse with Joe Biden, going from when he was actually upright and walking to this deterioration. And all you got to do is go back and take a picture of 6 months ago, and then a picture of a year ago, then a picture of 2 years ago. The decline is visible, is steady. This is not like he's had a stroke and you can put him into rehab and he's going to recover the ability to move the right or left side of his body, like we saw with John Fetterman, the senator from Pennsylvania. This is irreversible.
Yeah.
This is continued deterioration. And, what's so disgusting is that so many of the Democrats enabled this. They put a guy who is not intellectually competent to command even a Cub Scout unit in charge of our nuclear arsenal, in charge of our military force at this very time that we are on the brink of war with Russia, with China, and possibly Iran. It's insane.
Yeah. And to your point there, I actually, in a show I did a week or so ago, I wanted to pull up some Biden quotes from when NATO was originally going to expand for the very first tranche. And I had him at the Atlantic Council, and I showed some of the stuff, and I showed that his policies were bad back then, and that actually helped lay the foundation for what would eventually be the Russian invasion. But the one thing that really stood out to me was how articulate he was, and how, on top of it, even if he was wrong, but he was very emphatic about it. And then you look at where he was on the on his inauguration speech, when he finally was won there. And again, it was a very lucid, and it was relatively coherent. And then you look at the things that, like you said, over the last 6 months or so, and it's a marked deterioration. And as you say, and as doctors have said, this is a one-way ticket. There's no going back. So by any rational standard, if you love Joe Biden, if you love the Democratic Party, if you're a Democrat, to your soul, you should want to replace him quickly to get somebody out there who can do the job.
Yeah. No, it was back when I lived in Bethesda as a member of the Avenel Farm Golf Club, and one Sunday afternoon I was out playing, and Biden showed up with Hunter to play. And so we were in front of them, so we stopped to let him play through, because he was vice president then, had a Secret Service detail, and he could hit the ball pretty well, but he was watching his interactions that day. He could be entertaining, and he could be congenial. He didn't have that vacant look in his eyes. Now you look in those eyes, and there's he's asking himself, who's at home? Who forgot to turn on the lights? He just, that they call it he likely has what's called Parkinson's dementia. So he has Parkinson's disease combined with dementia, and that facial expression you get in the Parkinson's dementia literature is called poker face. So it's that, that blank expression where you can't tell if you're holding four aces or nothing in your hand. And that's, you see it with his gait. When he walks, the hands, they don't swing naturally or normally. They're stiffened down by his side, which is, you find the sign of the further neural deterioration. I mean, this is outright frightening. And that when you've got somebody who has got to make some snap decisions, that, hey, we just got word that, I'm not saying this would happen, but that Russia is activating its ballistic missile network. We don't know if this is a test or not. What do we do, Mr. President? And with Biden, he's going to go, can I get some vanilla ice cream? And he'll do it in a very soft voice. No understanding whatsoever. And that's what we're faced with. That's frightening.
Well, I was on Fox News about an hour and a half ago, and they asked me that same question, and that's exactly what I said. I mean, you're talking about, you have issues with China and Taiwan. You have obviously the Russia-Ukraine war that could go nuclear at any time. You have the possibility that Israel could attack into Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, which could draw in Iran. And then you have a regional war there, and there's all these literal life and death decisions. And you cannot afford to have the president have that blank stare that you just talked about, or freeze up, or just kind of mumble the nonsense he did. Even aside from that one freeze up he had during the debate there, most of his answers, most of them were just kind of rambling, and they would stop mid-sentence, and then a different word would come out, stuff that made no sense at all. You can't do that when you're talking to Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, or Kim Jong-un, et cetera. You just can't have that.
Well, in fact, yesterday I was on a podcast with a Chinese professor who's actually the director of China's cybersecurity institute. So he's fairly far up there. And then initially in talking to him, he's what I'd call stereotypical Chinese professor, reserved, very well-spoken, not emotional, overtly emotional. But then I asked him, I said, what did you, and this is a professor he did part of his studies at Georgetown University. So he lived in Washington, D.C., knows the area. And we talked a little bit about that. But I asked him, what did you think about the debate? And Danny, God is my judge. This hopefully when I get the video up, we can show this. His exact response was he started laughing, and he goes, and I'm quoting, I laughed my ass off. Now, when you're hearing a Chinese professor at a senior level that's involved with cybersecurity, which gets into Chinese national defense, and then he followed up by saying, he goes, "We don't know what to think about you guys. This is crazy. How can you allow how can you allow this to go on?" That's the question world leaders are asking. What is wrong with the United States that you can allow somebody in the condition of Joe Biden not just to walk on stage, but to actually sit there in the White House and be taken seriously? Well, what's going
Yeah.
on?
And
I mean,
Larry,
it really
I think that
endangers us.
I think that the bigger question is not whether he should run for reelection. I think that's already is. I think that's done. It's already over. The debate performance and all of these senior Democratic conversations since that time have made it irreversible. He can't go back on that and have any chance to win. It'll only get worse. But the bigger question to me, the one that's more important, and really kind of to your point that you just mentioned there, is can he even stay in office until January of next year? I don't know that he can,
Yeah.
and that there's be any safety in America. So we may get a President Harris whether we want it or not.
Yeah, well, Biden family is trying to do their version of Weekend at Bernie's. You know that movie where they carted around a corpse all weekend, dressed him up, made him look like he was alive. They're going to do that with Biden to the extent that they can, and which is why immediately they come out. They're having him only read from a teleprompter. They're not having him take any spontaneous questions. And even yesterday at the Department of, when he did his appearance with the National Weather Organization, he bungled that speech in several parts. And, he's still got that blank stare. They have to remind him of where he is. So, this is not going to get better. And as this is all taking place, you put it against the backdrop of in Ukraine, man, the Russian offensive is accelerating. They started off in low gear, boy. They're shifting now into high gear. And it's
And in fact, that's a good transition because that's exactly what I want to talk about. There's lots of political ramifications in the United States we could talk about, and we could spend easily the whole hour. But let's talk about the things that could matter for our national security in the near term and in the medium term, and that is the likelihood that it's going to be Donald Trump who's going to win this, whether anybody wants him or not. He's maybe the only one of any credibility left standing in the election. So let's take a look at that. Now, you just mentioned that there has been some advancements and some updates on the physical battlefield, on the tactical battlefield, but there's also things continuing to go on the diplomatic battlefield. And literally just before we came on the air here, President Putin is in Kazakhstan for a meeting of the SCO. And to include Xi Jinping. So he's met with him for the second time in just a short period of time. And this is a video that was released shortly before you came on.
All-encompassing partnership and strategic cooperation are at the highest period in their history. They are built on principles of mutual equality, and mutual benefit, and respect to the sovereignty of each other. Our cooperation is not aimed against anyone. We do not create any blocs or unions. We just act in the interests of our nations.
And look, Larry, it may not be exactly pointed against us. I think it is to a large extent, but you can not make any argument that it was not their best relationship in history between China and Russia is not the best that it's ever been in, probably in their history, because of our actions that we've done really since the Biden administration came into power.
No, absolutely. In fact, this is what's, to me, I find stunning, that the majority of Americans, they simply do not understand. They're so unwilling to read and listen. 52 years ago, when Nixon and Kissinger basically opened China, they established that relation with China, ostensibly to, do it for the benefit of China. But the ulterior motive of the United States was that we would have China be able to pit against then the Soviet Union. We saw that as a way to weaken the Soviets. And in fact, when they negotiated subsequently, when Reagan was in office in the 80s, one of the negotiation of the Intermediate Nuclear Force Agreement, the INF, was done in part because up to that point, Russia was building nuclear weapons, not so much to worry about the United States, they were worried about China. So as long as we felt like we had China and Russia at odds and that we could provoke a conflict between them, that was to our benefit. That's again one of the reasons that in the 1980s we were supplying arms both to Iran and Iraq, while Iran and Iraq were at war, because again we saw that as a way to weaken the Soviet Union. So the United States has always been playing this game. And if you went back 3 years ago and asked the average Chinese or Russian, hey, you guys going to be best buddies working together? They'd be looking and saying, not sure. That's not the case now. And I know that from talking to this professor I did yesterday, that they see this now, this relationship between China and Russia, as they're like two people that wound up in a lifeboat and recognize they're going to be at sea for a while, so they got to work together because they're facing this threat, and the threat is from the United States. And so now they've united, and in coming together with the economic and military power that they represent in a coordinated fashion dwarfs anything that we can bring to the table. That's what Americans fail to understand. And yet, what our politicians, both Democrat and Republican, are saying, they're talking about Taiwan as if Taiwan's an independent country and we got to free Taiwan from the Chinese. That ain't happening. We agreed 52 years ago that Taiwan was part of China, the one China policy. That's what we, the United States, agreed to through our president at the time, Richard Nixon. It was solidified when Gerald Ford was president, and it was continued by Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. So now we're trying to remake history. Chinese aren't having any of it, for starters.
And there's no value to us to do that. It was good the way it was.
Yeah. If anybody thinks we're better off going to war with China and Russia, they're insane. This is, a report just came out about 3 months ago detailing that right now the U.S. defense industry, all the defense contractors, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, the big three, there are others, are utterly dependent on China. That if China cut off the flow, the supply of certain materials, certain technologies, that our defense industry would be shut down. We could not continue to produce what we produce. And yet, what's our strategy? We're basically calling China fat, dumb, and ugly. But in doing that, we're talking about going to war with them. Yeah. And for a while, the Chinese put that off. But again, one of the things I verified in my conversation with this Chinese professor yesterday, China's had enough. They now recognize we're not sure if the Americans are crazy or evil, but we're not going to wait around to find out.
Yeah.
We are because they're seriously thinking about starting to cut the United States off from these critical materials. How stupid a policy can you come up with?
Yeah. Well, apparently we have some challenges to that title of what could we do more stupid. And I think one of the things you wrote about just a couple of days ago is about some of our INF treaty. You said the latest escalation in the Ukraine war stems from Donald Trump's decision. I wonder if you could explain a little bit about what we did then and what's the cost to us today.
So the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty was initially negotiated to keep down the number of missiles that a country could produce that would travel 300 to 3,000 miles. And it was primarily, from the standpoint of the United States, designed to protect Europe. And Russia signed on to it. So we get into 2019, and the intelligence community starts insisting that Russia is developing a particular weapons system that violates the treaty. And the Russians came back and said, no, let it, come in. We'll let you take a look at it, and we'll show you that it's not violating the treaty. But the United States rejected that. And the guys at DOD and the CIA persuaded Donald Trump to say, okay, we're pulling out of the INF treaty. And Vladimir Putin at the time, they objected to it. They wished the United States and Russia would continue in that because they saw it as a way to stop this, escalation, which could potentially bankrupt both countries. But the United States went ahead and did it. So from 2019 until now, so we're going over almost 5 years. Russia didn't make any declaration about saying, okay, even though the treaty is no longer valid, we're still going to continue to abide by it. But the United States has now announced it's placing those mid-range, those intermediate-range nuclear missiles in Europe. And so Vladimir Putin announced on Monday, okay, guys, we're going to start producing it too. That's the bottom line. And again, this shows you the stupidity of the United States, because Russia is actually in a position from an industrial capability that they can produce those missiles. We can't. We don't have the factory capability to do it at any kind of pace. Russia will outproduce us. So once again, we're like that boxer leading with his chin. Push your face out there so your opponent can punch it in. It's crazy, but that's what we're doing, and it's bipartisan. I don't want to leave anybody at the perception that this is just the Democrats being stupid. No, the Republicans got their share of stupidity in this as well.
Well, and no matter who is the culprit, the United States seems to be paying the price for this, and especially the regular people who don't have any power over this stuff. But let's look at who else is having some trouble with this. Not necessarily with the INF stuff, but with American decisions, and that is Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, what is it? I guess in the early part of June, Vladimir Putin comes out and says, all right, look, even though y'all keep accusing me of not being willing to talk and negotiate, I am willing to negotiate. I do want this war to end. Here's my conditions. And they were harsh for Ukraine, but they were legit. They were real. That it actually could lead to the end of the war, but it would basically mean Ukraine would have to capitulate. That's true, but it could also gives it still some freedom going forward. Now then, Biden came out after that and said, of course, we're not going to pay any attention to that. We're not going to listen to it. But then comes the debate last week on the 27th of June, and we have that horrible performance. And now it becomes pretty evident that Biden, who's been blanket support of Ukraine for the whole thing, is now likely not going to be able to stick around. If he even sticks around for the remainder of his term here, but it's very unlikely that he's going to continue on. On that same day, Zelensky was recorded, did an interview where he kind of admitted a little bit about how much trouble he's in.
Right.
We don't have too much time because we have a lot of wounded and dead people on the battlefield and through civilians. That's why we don't want to have this war during years.
So it almost seemed like, hey, we recognize that there's some problems here, and now I don't have this guaranteed support from the United States, and I do see Russia, which you mentioned a second ago, is a methodical offensive, which may be picking up steam right now. So I thought for a moment that perhaps Zelensky was going to do something that made sense and was going to look at that offer from Putin and going, as bad as that is, it looks a lot better than the one that's coming from the East here. But then yesterday, Yermak, who's one of the chief spokesmen for the Zelensky regime, released this, and he said, we are not ready to go to the compromise for the very important things and values. We want independence, freedom, blah, blah, blah. Bottom line is he's saying now, no, we're not willing to. And so I wonder if you can just, again, back to your CIA analyst here, try to help me understand here why he can see what you're talking about there in the Russian military side. He can see what's going on diplomatic or politically in the United States, but he still comes down on this. Make that work for me.
Well, note Andrei Yermak was his business manager, the guy that handled his PR when he was a comedian. Now he's the chief of staff, and basically Yermak's running things. If you ever looked at a picture of Yermak side by side with Zelensky, it looks like Mike Myers with Mini-Me from his things. I mean, Zelensky's just a little bitty guy. Yermak's this big Hulk, and Yermak's running the show. And they've convinced themselves that they're going to, quote, stay this course. Now, whatever that course is. What they don't, what they're failing to, I guess, completely grasp, the scale of casualties they're now suffering. It's been now for over 2 months at about 2,000 casualties per day. That's on track to match what the Germans lost in the Battle of Stalingrad. When you're talking hundreds of that, because you do 2,000 a day, just do the math. That's 30,000 a month. In 5 months, that's 150,000, right? And then in 10 months, you're looking at 300,000. That's unsustainable because they don't have a pipeline. They can recruit people, train them, and then kit them out and get them out to the battlefield. And it's not like NATO's sitting back behind them with robust reserves. I mean, for God's sake, we just had newspaper articles out of Germany. Here's Germany, who they make a great rifle, H&K, but they've got like 300,000 soldiers or reservists that need to be equipped with a rifle. They can only produce they only got 60,000. So everybody's going to be hot racking a rifle. Here, buddy, here, you shoot your 5 and I'll pass it on to my friend. Every 5 guys get 1 rifle. I mean, really?
Yeah, but Larry, I mean, but you're describing something, the whole condition here that should make any rational thinking person who wants to live think that we need to do something different. And yet you see them doing the thing that all of those conditions you just described should lead to the opposite conclusion.
Yeah.
What's going on the ground there?
Yeah, they're not paying attention to what's going on the ground. So they're going to, General Syrsky, the head of the Ukrainian army now, replace Zaluzhny. Reportedly they're gonna fire him. Now he lived up to his nickname, the Butcher, because of his incredible level of casualties they're suffering. I think the real thing that's got to change is, and maybe Orban, the Hungarian president, had some success in convincing Zelensky. If you don't cut this out, you're going to die. Once Zelensky becomes convinced that his physical survival, his ability to enjoy all of his ill-gotten gain. I mean, for God's sake, his wife just bought a $4.5 million car, reportedly. So, they're grifting off of the United States. But if he wants to survive to enjoy that, instead of winding up, at the base of a wall, having been shot or being hung from a lamppost, you may want to come to grips with, okay, I got to figure out an exit strategy and one that the Russians won't kill me. Now, that moment hasn't come for him yet, unfortunately.
It certainly seems like it's something he needs to be given a lot more consideration to. I mean, aside from the fact that his country is militarily being slowly ground to dust and will eventually be militarily defeated, there's also his personal character life issue. But what should add to his momentum of a decision there is the fact that it's increasingly likely that Trump is going to be the next president. Nothing's guaranteed, but unless something radically changes, it seems like that's writings on the wall. So let's take a look at what Trump has said. Now, here's what Trump said in 2019 with Zelensky, and I want you to notice his mentality and how he views things.
We put up a lot of money. I gave you anti-tank busters that, frankly, President Obama was sending you pillows and sheets. And I gave you anti-tank busters. And a lot of people didn't want to do that, but I did it. And I really hope that Russia, because I really believe that President Putin would like to do something, I really hope that you and President Putin get together and can solve your problem. That would be a tremendous achievement. And I know you're trying to do that.
You see, he was Trump at the one hand was saying, here's some weapons. In fact, here's more weapons than what my predecessor was giving you. But at the same time, he's like, y'all need to talk. So I want Putin to talk to you and y'all figure this stuff out. So obviously his mentality is negotiations, even while he was president last time.
Yeah, and that is, again, I have a friend who was worked closely. He wasn't part of the Trump campaign. He was a professional intelligence officer and handled a particular job that put him in contact, not just with Trump. He was in contact with Obama during his entire 8 years and with George W. Bush. So, he was drawing on experience, not just with Trump. And Trump is by nature inclined not to be confrontational, not to seek a military solution, to seek a negotiated solution. And boy, what was clear if you watch the body language of Zelensky is Zelensky wasn't having any of that. Even though Zelensky in his initial presidential run for the job in Ukraine had touted that his desire was to seek peace with the Russians. And a lot of people voted for him in the hopes that, okay, man, you're going to bring this fighting to an end. We'll get some reconciliation between Ukraine and the Donbass. And instead, Zelensky became a willing, useful tool of the West. And it's worked out to the horrific detriment of the Ukrainian people. The loss of life, and you've had Doug McGregor on the last day or two, and I think Doug is, I trust his sources that at least 600,000 dead Ukrainians, at least, and that's in a 2.5 year war. That is an astronomical figure. So.
Yeah, and I actually had a source who's got some ties to someone in the Kremlin who reported to me that there is also reportedly around 2 million wounded of various severities on top of it.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the total impact on the Ukrainian male population is just catastrophic.
Yeah, well, and when you look at sort of the PTSD casualties that the U.S. military personnel suffered in this country, I'm not trying to minimize what they experienced, but it's not even the 10th of the level of violence and intensity that these Ukrainian soldiers are experiencing.
Wholeheartedly concur with that. As one who fought in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and in a high intensity warfare, it's a fraction, maybe not even a tenth of what these guys are experiencing.
Yeah. So when you take that, how these good soldiers and people of like I heard the story the other day of one SEAL Team 6 guy who got into alcohol and ended up killing himself. Had a wife and 3 kids, and it's just tragic. So if that happens to our soldiers, what do you think's going on with the Ukrainians who are surviving? I mean, the trauma, the emotional, psychological trauma that's being inflicted because of our enabling of this war it's almost undefinable. And
I think
that's the other factor.
Yeah, I think that there's a ticking time bomb that's going to really impact the Ukrainian and frankly the Russian society as well. Once this war is even over, nobody's even talking about that. Look at the U.S. right now. And how much money we spend, even still now, years now after the Afghan war is over and for the most part, the Iraq war was over. And we had hundreds of thousands of soldiers that were diagnosed with PTSD that are still getting service to this day, have lots of trouble. A lot of them have trouble integrating into society still. And as you say correctly, what we experience is not a fraction of what these guys experience, and they've got no infrastructure. As bad as we think the VA is and the problems it has had, it's a miracle. It's magnificent compared to what's over there, and there's not going to be any money for it afterwards. What is going to happen to that society once the war is over and all these guys go back?
Yeah, no, I don't see how it stays intact. Going into this war, Ukraine was already considered the poorest country in Europe, poorer than Albania, for God's sake.
That's hard to believe.
And yet, unlike Albania, Ukraine was like the fifth country in the world with the most natural resources: coal, gas, oil, nitrogen, and salt. I mean, just they on paper they were a wealthy nation, and the reason that they were the poorest is because they had been so openly exploited by people like Hunter and Biden and Joe Biden and Mitt Romney. Let's be clear. This is not just Democrats doing it. This is Republicans doing it as well. They saw Ukraine as this free lunch ticket, and we got in there with all these different corporations that are buying up land, doing medical research that was questionable and wouldn't be allowed in the United States, and exploiting these people all along. Yeah, I mean, the real difference, one of the reasons the West is so angry at Vladimir Putin is in 2001, shortly after he took office, He called all the oligarchs in and he said, hey, you want to be billionaires? That's fine. This raping Russia and taking the resources out of the country and putting them in the hand of foreigners, that's going to stop. And you're going to stop meddling in politics. And if you don't like it, I'm putting you in prison. People, oh, that's authoritarian. Well, you know what? When you look at the transformation of Russia from then to now, Russia is now the fourth largest economy in the world. Russia has very, very little debt. Russia is not plagued with inflation. Russia has full employment. And, compare that to the United States. It's a night and day difference.
For that matter.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right. So that's what Trump has said in 2019. Now then, at this debate the other night, he reinforced it and made it much more firm that he's looking for a negotiated settlement. He said this.
The money that we're spending on this war, and we shouldn't be spending, it should have never happened. I will have that war settled between Putin and Zelensky as president-elect before I take office on January 20th. I'll have that war settled.
Okay, we can put him on the hyperbole of having, settled a war when he has no authority before being elected. But the point is clear that is where he's going. The last thing he's going to do is continue on the Biden policies of this 10-year negotiated deal that they just signed over. So the writing is on the wall. Is this train is over. So why in the world then do I have 3 days later Zelensky saying this?
The world has enough power to force Russia into peace. And in particular, defending the Kharkiv region from the Russian offensive, we have proven that the determination of our partners truly helps. Strikes on the Russian border areas helped protect lives. So will further decisions, the bold decisions that must be made, that we need and that we are discussing with our partners. In the coming weeks, we will continue our communication to achieve the necessary decisions.
Now, let me ask you from what you know or what you've heard, I say, because I don't think there can be any authoritative answer to the question I'm about to ask. But on the surface, it would appear completely irrational to be making that statement and having that discussion based on what you saw at the debate, based on what Trump has expressly said, what he's always been, and then what's probably going to come, and then all the military stuff. So that would seem to be an irrational position. But I've been talking to some folks lately who say that he is under, Zelensky meaning, is under so much pressure from so many different directions. There's almost nowhere he can go because there is apparently some nationalists within his country that said if you even talk about negotiated settlement, we're going to kill you, or there's going to be a coup against you. If he continues going down this path, then he's going to lead his country into military defeat. So he can't say negotiated settlement. He has to say war. But if he says war, then that means they're going to lose, et cetera. So almost no matter what direction he goes, his life is physically in danger. Could you talk about how that plays in, or is there a different explanation for why he's doing what he's doing?
Yeah, well, it's the same psychological reaction you have if you're in the parking lot heading towards your car and somebody comes up with a gun to attack you. People do have a variety of actions. Some freeze, they don't do anything. Some run away immediately. Some decide to fight. And Zelensky's trying to figure out, what am I going to do? What he's faced with, though, if Trump is elected, and in that interim period between the election and the inauguration, I actually think Trump can bring an end to this because he's going to let Zelensky and the Ukrainians know, hey, the gravy train's over. As soon as I've got, on January 20th, you're completely cut off. And if you make me wait to January 20th in order to find a negotiated solution, the terms for you are going to be much worse. Before we'd be willing to consider letting you have asylum in the United States. That property you supposedly bought in Vero Beach, Florida, we'll let you go there and hang out. But if you don't do this before January 20th, the welcome mat is out. Door is shut. You're going to be on your own. Good luck. Trump's got some leverage. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him play that kind of leverage. And at that point, Zelensky's going to wake up and recognize, okay, the guy's got a gun on me and I got to give up my wallet. And he'll gladly give up the wallet in order to live. I don't think he's suicidal, but we've already seen they had the third coup attempt yesterday or the day before yesterday.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're waiting for possible coup attempts, man. they're starting to line up. It's going to be the coup competition.
Yeah, and there's just also the risk that this continued Russian military pressure that you cited earlier is going to continue to exacerbate the attitudes within the soldiers inside the country. And I've been reading already a lot of it on the Ukrainian media, where there's lots of anger growing at Zelensky because he's putting them in position to where they can't win, and all they can do is go into these areas and die. And a lot of them are not wanting to just basically go and just commit suicide by obeying the orders here, and that they may turn on him. I mean, the military may turn on him.
Yeah, funny thing about human nature, isn't it? That, people, once they're faced with death, they find they want to live a little longer. Most do. There are some with, the psychological depression and such where they're ready to end their lives. But most of these folks are saying, hey, survival sure beats the alternative. And, Russia really has perfected a military, both doctrine, strategy, and tactics over the course of the last 2.5 years, where now they're starting, they're operating like a V8 engine firing on all cylinders, because they're using combined arms. They're using the integration of electronic warfare with armor. They've actually shifted from using armor to they're using motocross bikes as a way to both that they attack with a much smaller profile, much faster than any tank or any armored personnel carrier can operate, and it makes it much more difficult for a drone. A drone can come in and hit one tank and take out 15 guys, or an armored personnel carrier take out 15 guys. Now, if it comes down, that one or drone can only hit one motorbike, and the other motorbikes go forward. And I mean, they're operating in crews of 15 and 20. And so they're attacking Ukrainian positions before the Ukrainians have a chance to organize a defense. And it's, like I said, the Russians are displaying an enormous number of new tactics, both in terms of usage of drones, electronic warfare, the fab bombs, the ones that are glide bombs that come in, along with conventional artillery. I mean, it's, you wouldn't want to be any NATO soldier put into a trench facing that, because you've never experienced that.
Right.
Not in your entire life. Never.
And I also talked to somebody who's an expert on the Russian side, and has eyes to see the reality of it. And despite these absurd claims that we have of the Russians losing 1,200 killed per day or some crazy thing like that, and the British media is always saying it's like 500,000 dead or whatever. They say that's nonsense, but they say that the actual number is not insignificant, in that it's probably around 60,000. And they say, look, U.S. and all of its Vietnam War lost about 57,000. So it's a meaningful number in a relatively short period of time as compared. And they do suffer casualties. But this source also told me that because of the Russian mentality and just their culture, is that they could continue to suffer this kind of casualties for a long time, many, many years, and continue to go on. But on the Ukraine side, they don't have the personnel, and they don't have a number of people to keep doing that. So this can only have a one end, whether sooner or later.
Well, and in fact, you understand by virtue of your experience the importance of training. That, what most people think is that you join the Army and then you go through basic training and that's it. They don't understand that really your entire military life after that is training, unless you're put into a combat environment. And so you're learning how to train as you may fight. And so without that understanding, what we're looking at is the Ukrainians are grabbing guys off the street, putting them in uniform. They're not putting them through 3 months and a week of basic training. They're not even getting that. They're not getting advanced individual training and skills on how to operate a mortar, or how to operate a howitzer, or how to operate a tank, or how to carry out communications, or, go down all the different skills that are required that you want to have in a functioning military unit. And yet they're supposed to, and at the same time, the Russians are actually doing that. They are recruiting people. They're running them through training programs, not just the basic, through the advanced individual instruction. Most of the Russian troops are not committed to the front until they've had minimum 6 7 months of training under their belt, compared to the average Ukrainian troop that's getting maybe 2 weeks. That doesn't work. They don't survive. And it's
Yeah.
just, this is not the world of Hollywood where, you get these magical capabilities. This is real life.
And
that's
Gary
what
showing on that screen right there. When you're being literally grabbed off the street against your will and thrown into combat, that's radically different than the Russian side, who still has apparently between 20 and 30,000 volunteers per month. And then they get, a substantial amount of training before they're put into the front lines. And so once those guys, both of those sides get up there, one is going to be a lot more capable and motivated than the other.
Well, in fact, the Russians are running really closer to 40,000 a month. So last year alone, they added almost 500,000 troops, and we've seen the Russian military strength. At the whole start of the special military operation, I think there were somewhere around 600, 700,000 total in terms of active duty. Active duty numbers now have almost doubled, so they're up to close to 1.4 million. Look at the United States. Our active duty strength is 452,000, and we're struggling. We're struggling to even maintain recruitment levels. So Russia stepped up to the task because they recognize we're in an existential fight for our lives. We're fighting not just Ukraine; we're fighting NATO, and that's how they view it. And
they're definitely acting that way. Listen, I know we're running short on time here. In the remaining time we got here, what do you think, given all of this stuff that we've talked about, both the military, the political, the diplomatic, the domestic issue here about who's going to win or who's not going to win in the United States presidential election, how do you see this thing going, given all that from right now up to January 20th, 2025? Can the war continue on that long?
It can, but I think it's unlikely. Because what we're going to see is Ukraine's going to fall off the radar completely. If the chaos in the Democrat Party in terms of figuring out who's going to run against Donald Trump, that's going to accelerate. We've seen that all the lawfare that's been directed against Donald Trump is falling apart. All the plans of these lawyers to get Donald Trump in prison and tied up. The Supreme Court threw a hand grenade into that party last Friday. So, or I guess on Monday. So we're seeing this, the lawfare disappear. Ukraine's going to become not even a sideshow. They're going to become an afterthought, particularly as the losses mount on the battlefield, and with the Russians taking more and more territory every day. In the past they were criticized, they're going too slow. No, they're not going slow now. They have accelerated it. They're likely to open up a new front up in Sumy. They got 100,000 more troops up in Belarus. They could literally go down and head towards Kiev. So the Russians haven't even begun to stretch out their wings on this. And as they do that, the last thing the Biden team or whoever's running wants to do is get the United States embroiled in a foreign war. Because the vast majority of the American people, Republican, Democrat alike, no longer have the stomach for it. Yeah. They don't want that. And then we haven't even talked about what happens when Israel catches on fire. Right. So, I mean, this is, we are looking at one of the most unstable times in international history that the United States has ever encountered at the very time we've got the weakest political leadership we've ever had. And that combination is dangerous.
That is frightening, and I couldn't disagree with you. That we just have what we have. But listen, we're going to keep putting the truth out there, whether it's ugly or not, because people need to know what's really going on and what's at stake here. And we really appreciate you coming on, as always, and sharing your insights here. So nothing's going to at least happen that we don't know. We can't be caught short on it. At least our viewers are not going to be. So thanks a lot for coming on today, Larry. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Danny, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure, man. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure for us too. And we wish you a good 4th of July. I hope you have a great time tomorrow.
Happy 4th to you guys.
And thanks. And we also a happy 4th of July to everybody out there. I know a lot of our viewers are not American, but it's a holiday here tomorrow, but we're still going to be on. We're going to have a new person you haven't seen, Lyle Goldstein, who's the director of Asia Engagement, going to be talking about some issues related to the joining or the widening diplomatic circles between Russia and China and North Korea and how that affects the United States here. You're not going to want to miss that. It's a really good episode. We'll see you with that tomorrow. In the meantime, we thank you for joining us today, and we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.